Hello and welcome to Etc. I'm Dave McLauchlan. In today's program we take a look at the Australian Museum of Modern Media on the Mornington Peninsula, the recently renamed TV World, previously known as Studio City. The proprietors of the museum are Bob Phillips and his wife Judy Banks. Judy also runs a television and dramatic arts school in conjunction with the museum. First I spoke to Bob about the museum and its origins. Bob, can you tell me how this museum got started?
David, partly out of default. I think I was a bit of an amateur collector at Channel 9. I was working for Channel 9 in the sort of golden days of Graham Kennedy and in Melbourne Tonight and things like that. And I started to collect odd bits of memorabilia, old running sheets and photographs and film cans and things like that, with no real purpose in mind. But I think the crux happened when I was walking out of the car park at Channel 9 in Melbourne one night and saw a film can glistening out of a dump master, went over and had a look, took it out, and it was labelled "The Beatles Sing for Shell," which is a historic bit of Australian television. And I took it home and didn't think all that much more about it.
Was that the only copy of it?
It turned out that it wasn't, but who would have known? And I had a look at it. It was a 16mm film recording, and I put it up on a projector, had a look, and sure enough, here's Paul and John and George and Ringo. And then I thought, well, this stuff is going to get lost, it is going to get thrown out. And we then decided to create a very little museum on the Mornington Peninsula, where we are here, called something vague. I think it was the Peninsula Television and Film Museum. And it grew from there, and it grew to the stage where eventually we called it the Australian Museum of Modern Media. Later on it became Studio City, and as we speak it's now known as TV World, and is one of the major tourist attractions on the peninsula.
Is the museum run by yourself alone, or is there other people involved?
It's privately run. It's run by myself and my wife, Judy Banks, who's an ex-television actress and performer and now drama teacher. And we run it with a team of local volunteers. We get a lot of help from people who are still connected in the industry, particularly people who, like Peter Smith of Channel 9, who's very into the historic background of Australian television. So we get a lot of help, but certainly no government assistance or anything like that.
Are the exhibits donated to you, or do you have to find financing to buy them?
It's a bit of both, David. We tend to rely on donations from television stations when they decide to throw out old cameras or not so much props, but we get a lot of old photographs and things from the stations. Probably more importantly, we rely on people. One of our prize exhibits is Rolf Harris's wobble board. Well, that was donated by Rolf Harris when we first opened 12 months ago. And I used to play it. It was the only musical instrument I could play, and I felt quite proud about this. But we had a tour go through one day, and someone broke it. So it's not in a playable condition, but it's a prize exhibit. Other things like another thing I can play is Judith Durham's tambourine from the Seekers, and Judith donated quite a lot of stuff. So we're pretty much reliant on personalities and production people keeping the stuff. And you know, we had one item that was a Beatles scarf thrown out to the crowd in Melbourne by George Harrison, and a lady who's now a grandmother was a teeny bopper when she got it, and she's kept it at home in a linen press all these years, and we now have it on display. So
it's not just television memorabilia alone you display here?
No, the museum is basically TV, pop, media and cinema and radio. So it's a pop culture magazine, I guess, or museum if you like.
Bob, what are some of the major items you have here?
Well, my favourite item I think is Dexter, who was the obnoxious talking robot from Perfect Match, which is a big hit television show for Channel 10 back in the 80s. And Dexter was almost a mechanical robot as he became a star. And a lot of people who come to the museum identify with him, and we've even had couples who were matched up on Perfect Match with Dexter as the witness. So he's one of the favourite exhibits. But we've got other things here, just even little things like a drumstick that was donated from In Excess. And we, you know, again, we value donations from people. We've got an hysterical dress that Marcy Jones wore in the 60s. She had a group called Marcy Jones and the Cookies, and this is an outfit that you would swear must have been painted onto her. It's just so incredibly tight. But it says something of what the 60s was all about. We've got other things here, including the big audio mixing desk from Channel 9. It's a giant, probably the biggest mixing desk that any of us have seen. It was handmade. It was custom made for the head of audio at Channel 9 to do the old Graham Kennedy and Don Lane shows, and was last used on Hey Hey It's Saturday. But that's one of the big mechanical things. A lot of other exhibits that you know, women like the gowns and dresses and things like that. So we're trying to cater for all taste of nostalgia.
You've got some videos running in the museum as well, I see, some commercials and some other things. Tell us about those.
Well, we run, the basic main programs that we run a thing called Back to the 60s, which Graham Kennedy hosts, and that covers the very early days of Melbourne television and some of the things that went wrong, and some of the very early personalities on Melbourne television. We run another program called Australian Music Stars of the 60s, and that covers the very early days of, you'll see Olivia Newton-John looking about 11, and Normie Rowe when he started, the great J.O.K., but a lot of the early rockers, Jade Hurley collapsing at the piano, and that's got a fascination. We have a lot of our visitors are sort of the baby boomers age, and they relate to that because it was the music that they grew up with, and all the girls were in love with Johnny Farnham and all that sort of thing. So that's a very successful program. We've got another one that we run in another area of the museum called Isn't That What's His Name? And it's a compilation of commercials over 40 years of television, and you see almost every personality stage-wise and television-wise that somehow got roped into doing a commercial.
Some of the cameras and other equipment like sound booms and things you've got here look really old and ancient. Do any of them still work?
A lot of them do, actually, David. We have here just beside me, there's the original Mole Richardson camera crane from Channel 9, and that was actually, when Channel 9 started, that was brought out from Hollywood, and we later found out it was used on the movie Lawrence of Arabia, so it's had a bit of an interesting career, but it's a dinosaur by modern standards. You know, it was a four-man operation. But we quite often hire out some of the gear. Last year, in fact, we supplied a lot of gear for Countdown the Musical, which related back to Molly Meldrum's Countdown, and we had a couple of the original cameras and booms and things like that. They work with a certain amount of reluctance. I wouldn't use them on any modern program or anything like that. And they're great, bulky. You know, I think that the main thing that people comment on is that everything in the early days of television, and certainly the early days of cinema, was so big and heavy. You know, they were all cast iron mounts and things like that. But these days you walk around, well, like the camera you're using, which you know, it's just a mini camera, but in the early days they were giant cameras that had to be carted up to the top of the Melbourne cricket ground to do the footy, and then brought back to do something else at Channel 7 studios, and they were a nightmare for technicians and cameramen alike.
I notice also, as well as television equipment, there's the odd bit of film gear here. Why is that included?
Well, I guess we are the Australian Museum of Modern Media, and a lot of our heritage relates to the old picture show men who we've got quite a lot of gear here from a company that was the O'Halloran family, and they really were movie show men on the road. They went up in northern Victoria and southern New South Wales and went from town to town lugging all this huge gear, running nitrate film, which is extremely dangerous. But every weekend they would go to a different country town, and it was big excitement. You know, they were the start of motion pictures. They were only silent at that time. But we've got some of the early projectors and carbon arc lamps and things like that. Very primitive gear again by today's standards, but by that time it was the state of the art, high technology. But we try and pay credit to and form some sort of a tribute to the early filmmakers as well. We've got stuff here going back to the very early days of Australian film production. Some of the old tape recorders that we used in the early days of sound and splicing gear and moviolas and things like that. So there is interest here for people who are studying, you know, perhaps film studies, media, anything like that.
I noticed a very old video disc recorder there. Tell us a bit about that.
Oh, well, that's again one of my favourite things here, but it was a nightmare. It was in the early days of Melbourne television. It was brought out by Channel 7, who were obviously doing the football, and they had no way of doing a video replay or doing a automatic replay, and they came up with this disc recorder that would allow them to go back 9 seconds and replay a goal that might have just happened or a wicket being lost at the cricket or something like that. It was a disc a bit bigger than an old style microgroove record, but it used to rotate at this horrendous speed, and it was made of, it was chrome metal, and every so often it would take off and go through the studios of Channel 7, and they almost lost a couple of videotape operators, but it was at the time it was a fantastic innovation. You know, it was the first time that they could actually get a slow-mo replay, but a horrendous bit of machinery. So that's one of my favourite things.
Why the Mornington Peninsula as a location for a television museum?
It's a very good question, and it's a question, David, that the former Premier, Jeff Kennett, asked at one stage, and we said to him, the reason it is down here in the first place was that we saw this as a very viable tourism venue, but our intention is to move back to the city, to the Central Business District, and we've been looking at the Docklands, and specifically with the new Studio City development, which will be hopefully Paramount theme park, which may or may not happen at this stage. But it's worked very well down here, but it is, and it's given us the opportunity to, if you like, do an off-Broadway run. We've been able to try a lot of things down here. We've been in 3 locations on the peninsula before we came back here to the Murdoch Cool Store. But we've had the opportunity to try different exhibits, different sort of ways of presenting it, different ways of marketing the museum. And over 12 years, we've accumulated a lot of ideas on what works and what doesn't, what people want. But we're not that accessible to the majority of people who come into Melbourne, particularly interstate people who may come down and stay within the Central Business District. And eventually, if we do move into the Docklands, obviously we'd have a lot more passing trade and be accessible to a totally different audience.
How do you envisage the future of the museum?
Well, I think television history is happening all the time. You know, you have programs like Hey Hey It's Saturday, which concluded last year after a 28-year run. That's now television history. You'll have programs that will run a lot less than that, again will go into the archives. But I think that we have to keep pace with the new innovations with television, with digital television, with the move into a lot more satellite television. The equipment is changing all the time, and I would imagine that the material that's being used in the commercial stations and Channel 31 will eventually move down here, hopefully. Or we'll move it up to Channel 31, whatever the way. But television history is being made all the time.
Welcome back to Etc. Judy Banks has had a career on the stage and in television, including working in children's television on the Fred Bear's Breakfast A-Go-Go program, and now runs her own school of television and dramatic art in conjunction with the TV World Museum. I spoke to her about her involvement with the museum, her career in television and her teaching. Judy, can you tell me how you fit into the television museum here?
Well, I think I'm the oldest artefact in the building, to be perfectly honest, David. I'm the receptionist, and I also have a television school here, which I've been operating now for about 30 years, because I was very young when I started. But it's going very, very well, and I teach them how to do commercials and interviewing and acting scripts and even how to screen test, because Bob and myself, Bob Phillips of course, have been in the industry since it actually started, which is a long, long time ago in black and white television.
Was there any particular rationale for combining a television school with a museum?
Well, it all just fitted in so well, David, because during the day the museum is a theatrette in my television studio, and of course we've got the lovely old cameras from Channel 9 and Channel 7, so it's quite easy to switch it over at night time and run it as a television school. So it's a movie house during the day and a television studio at night. I've had a lot of success stories. Newsreaders and doctors and lawyers, people that sell spa baths, anybody who has to go on television, and they get very intimidated because they find it very overwhelming talking to a piece of glass, although I try and tell them as I'm looking into that down the barrel at this very moment that really is just one very, very special person that we're relating to in that lens. So we do things like as I said, models who want to do 100% voiceover work, they come to me. Sometimes people who want a video resume. Nowadays, instead of just sending off your printed resume, it's rather nice to accompany it with a video. So there's a lot of broad things that we cover. It's not just a television acting school. It's, well, we teach communication through the use of television.
A lot of the people you teach are business people. Why do they want to know about how to look good on television?
Well, because a lot of them, like politicians, for instance, they're academics, if you like to put it that way, so they're used to communicating through the written word. So they find it, you know, a little bit, they feel very vulnerable when they're sitting looking into the camera, and they want to know how to communicate in a very warm, friendly manner, especially a politician, because sometimes we're a little bit unkind and we judge people because of the way they come across on television, whether they're charismatic like Bob Hawke, or in the early days rather flat and boring like John Howard. Not to say if he'd come to me for lessons, of course, he'd be quite brilliant by now. But so that's the reason. I've taught priests who are used to reading. They're academics also, so when they have to get up and do a homily, they find that rather difficult, using eye contact and interacting with an audience. So it's just teaching people how to relax and think of the camera as another person. As is in all public speaking, you don't think of a whole group of people, you think you're communicating to that one very special person.
And how did you start in television, and what are some of the things you've done?
Oh, that's going back a long way, David. I started off in television, I went straight from the theatre. I was in a lot of musicals, and we went from the Princess Theatre, I virtually went straight to Channel 9 and was in their very first variety show on a Friday night at 6 o'clock, and they were great fun days because everything was live and lots of things happened very spontaneously, like flats falling down on top of you, or the dry ice they were using for effect would suddenly be a great big cloud all over the screen, and wigs would fall off and all sorts of funny things like that, and we couldn't do anything about it because it was all live to air. So it had a freshness and a spontaneity which I think television lacks today.
What are some of the most notable things you remember from your career over the years in television?
Well, I've done a variety of things, David. I've done commercials, I've been a presentation announcer. Probably one of the happiest times on television was when I was co-hosting a morning show, Fred Bear's Breakfast A Go-Go, with Fred Bear, and that was quite an experience because Fred didn't talk, rather like Humphrey, and so I had to sort of answer my own questions, which was rather fun. But he was a perfect, wonderful, cleverly mime person. He just, you know, you could tell just by the tilt of his head or the way he raised his paw, I knew exactly what he meant. And sometimes there was a little bit of double entendre there, and he was rather a naughty bear. So adults rather liked tuning in the morning as well as the children.
Was that the pre-Humphrey the Bear?
No, Humphrey was actually running, but Fred used to be in the Magic Circle Club with Liz Harris. They were in the very, very early days. And so Fred was unique. He owned the costume and he was the one and only Fredbear, whereas I think Humphrey sometimes has a few other identities. There are a few other people that climb into the suit.
What's the funniest moment you can recall from your career?
Well, they didn't seem very funny at the time, but there were some rather embarrassing moments. Going back to the Fredbear show, I remember one morning in particular we used to open the show with a song, and in those days, remembering that it was early 70s, I used to wear a hairpiece, and to attach the hairpiece they used to put a stocking on my head and just pull the front bit out and then pin the hairpiece on the back so that it kicked up like ABBA or one of those early 70s hairstyles. And so I was singing in the rain, and I had an umbrella, and we were doing a little dance routine with Fredbear, of course. And then at the appropriate moment, I put the umbrella up, but unfortunately I connected with the hairpiece, and so I just took the whole hairpiece off, and it was sitting there on top of the umbrella, and I was completely bald. And there's nothing they could do except go to black. And that was live television. We just had to make a joke of it.
What do you think is the most exciting or different thing about live television to do than pre-recorded TV?
Well, live television, you certainly have, I think, more of an adrenaline rush because you know you only have one go at it. Whereas nowadays, if they pre-record something, you know that if you make a mistake, well, the director just says, cut, we'll go again. So I just think that excitement, and as I call it, that, adrenaline rush, is lacking. And I think you can always tell when, maybe it's just me, when something's pre-recorded. I really like the live stuff better.
Judy, what advice would you give to budding television presenters?
Well, first of all, I'd suggest that they come to the Judy Banks School of Television at Mornington, because I think before you can say, I want to go on television, you must be able to understand all the techniques that we need to know about working in the media. It all looks so easy when you see someone successful on television, but that's the trick. You've got to be so natural and so relaxed that everybody at home looks at the screen and says, I can do that. But you also need to know how to move on camera, how to give the right shot to the director, how to project the voice. If you're acting, of course, we don't look into the camera at all. It's only for presentation work that we look straight into camera. There are so many techniques, and I think even 10 weeks of learning these basic techniques, these basic skills, will give you the confidence to perhaps get a videotape made and approach an agency and say, look, here is my written resume and this is some of the work that I've learned over the last 10 weeks.
How did you get into teaching as such, and did you find that more or as rewarding as actual acting yourself?
Well, I have to be honest, it's not quite as rewarding as actually doing it, but it is fun when you really can, even a very young child, well, 8 years old is pretty young, isn't it? She came to me last term and she just didn't have any confidence at all. In fact, I waited till about the 4th week. Every week I'd say, would you like to get up and have a try? And she'd shake her head. So eventually she did have the courage to get up, and look, she is just a different little girl. She's just so confident, she loves it, and I just think the bottom line is, if you don't want to be an actor or a presenter, it gives you so much more confidence to come in and learn some basic communication skills. I got into it, David, because I was probably through Fredbear's Breakfast A Go-Go working with children 5 days a week, 2 hours a day, and often Fred and I would do lots of personal appearances. And I think that Crawford Productions at the time wanted to start a school, and they felt that because I could interact with children so well, that they would start a school where I concentrated on working with children. So I started off working for Crawford Productions, and then later on I decided to run my own school, which ran very successfully for 30 years, one in Richmond and now this one at Mornington. So that's how I got into it.
And that's the end of our program for today. But one last thing, we need your ongoing help to keep putting this program and Channel 31 to air. So if you want to sponsor this program or the work of Northern Access Television and Channel 31, or become a part of the team who put this program together, you can ring me, David McLauchlan, on 0412 166 563. That's 0412 166 563, or take a look at our website at welcome.to/etc. Goodbye.